There's never gonna be another character quite like Edward Newgate. His unwavering confidence and ego, booming presence and aura, but yet compassion and love. This is the one thing that sets him apart from the rest. A man called a demon and monster by his enemies, the strongest man in the world who has the power to destroy everything with his bare hands, is also the kindest and most caring person to those he loves. So how does this happen? How can one man have so many contradictions? He was born on the island of Sphinx in the New World. Everyone there was poor, and because of that, they weren't able to pay the required heavenly tribute to the celestial dragons, so the world government abandoned the island and left it to fend for itself. This opened up the island to attacks and raids from pirates, as well as leaving it lawless with no government structure in place. These were the conditions that Edward Newgate grew up in. He was orphaned by the chaos and left alone without any family, so with no other options, he had to set out to sea. He bounced around from crew to crew and increased in power rapidly. He was physically immensely strong, being able to throw around giants with one hand with little to no effort. Besides this, he also became a proficient hockey user, having all three types, including being a conqueror. And on top of all of this, he found and ate the most destructive dull fruit in the world, the Gura Gura no Mi, in other words, the earthquake fruit. On paper, he had the most talent out of anyone. He was gigantic for a human, had unbelievable strength, was even born as a conqueror. But throughout all of this, he was desperately searching for something that all the power in the world couldn't help him find. The only thing he wanted ever since he was a child, a family. Despite having everything a pirate could ever want, none of it mattered to him, because he wasn't really a pirate. He set out to sea to find his place with people he could trust and love like a family. He didn't care about the treasure, the glory, the strength. All he wanted was a home, and he was so desperate for that, he eventually fell into the wrong crowd in order to find one. He joined the Rocks Pirates under the leadership of Rox D. Xebec. The Captain Rox was known as a fool and lunatic, having the goal of toppling the world government and becoming the king of the world. We don't know how much of this is true and how much is government propaganda, but back to that in a second. During his time on Rox's crew, it seems that Newgate was trying his best to foster the family he always wanted, being the one to take in Kaido, probably seeing himself in him, a young person failed by the world government and going out to sea by himself. These were the type of people Newgate wanted to give a place to, not just the strong, but those who had nowhere else to go. Unfortunately, he had to settle for only those like Kaido. Rox would never let anyone weak on his crew, and if he did, they'd be abused and most likely killed by their own crewmates soon after. And this kind of mindset wore on Newgate over the years and shaped his worldview. He wanted the opposite of this, but the crew he was on just went further and further down this path, recruiting ambitious, violent pirates and only getting worse. He grew to not respect Rox at all, calling him an idiot and not taking his orders, but he would eventually get his chance to leave. On the island of God Valley, 38 years before present day, the most infamous, ruthless, and powerful pirate crew the world had ever seen was completely eradicated. Rox was killed and the government erased his name from history, and his former crew dispersed, most of the members creating their own crews, and Newgate was no different. And from this point on, he became known as Whitebeard. Finally free from the shackles of Rox, Whitebeard learned from his mistakes and approached his crew in his own way. Instead of creating a crew based on violence and strength, he made one based on unity and love. He'd seen the worst of what the world had to offer, from his childhood into his time as a pirate, so he wanted to make a change, create a place where orphans like him could come and find the home that he always wanted. He made the family that he'd been searching for his entire life, taking in anyone who had nowhere else to go, and they became his children. One day, they ended up shipwrecked in the country of Wano, and it was gonna take a week for them to repair the ship. They were about to head out for some supplies, but then someone came rushing towards them. Kozuki Oden, a samurai and next in line for the throne of Shogun. Whitebeard could sense his incredible strength and told his crew to stand back. Oden charged forward, Whitebeard took his stance, and they clashed. Their immense power made a huge shockwave, and right then, in the heat of battle, after Oden hit him with all of his power, he asked Whitebeard to let him on his crew. After things cooled down a bit, they shared a meal and Whitebeard denied him. Odin was a conqueror. He wasn't the type of man to follow someone else, and from his experiences on the Rocks crew, getting those types of people together wouldn't end well. On top of that, Odin was royalty, and taking him away from his country could cause political issues down the line, so he came to the conclusion to leave Wano without Odin. But of course, Odin would not give up without a fight. He wrapped a chain to Whitebeard's ship and grabbed hold, and in turn, one of his samurai grabbed hold of him to stop him. Whitebeard let the samurai up, but left Odin to hold onto the chain, being dragged along through the oceans of the New World. He made Odin a promise, hold onto the chain for 3 days, and he led him onto his crew. The reason why he was so rough on Odin was because he wasn't like the rest of Whitebeard's family. People who needed a home and family and had nowhere else to go. Odin had all of that. He was the first person who wanted to join Whitebeard's crew purely by choice and not necessity. So Whitebeard decided to test that. He wouldn't let such a clearly insane man near his family unless he saw how dedicated he was to the crew, and so let him hold onto the chain for as long as he could. He was dragged through sea monster infested waters, blistering colds and more, picking up countless injuries along the way, but eventually he'd held onto the chain for 2 days and 23 hours, 1 hour left, and the crew started cheering him on, cause in just 1 more hour he'd be one of them. But having just minutes left, Odin let go. He heard a woman crying out and he went to help her, so he'd failed the test, but not in Whitebeard's eyes. Odin was willing to give up his greatest dreams to help someone he didn't even know, and how could you doubt someone's character after that? So Whitebeard gladly brought him aboard his ship, and from then on, he was his little brother. The samurai that came along with Odin named Izo joined the crew as well, and Whitebeard let the woman Odin saved come along too as a favor to him. Her and Odin eventually got married and had 2 kids on Whitebeard's ship. At this point, the crew was growing at a fast pace, so Whitebeard decided to split up into divisions and made Odin the 2nd division captain, and around this time, he took in a child named Marshall D. Teach. Along their travels, they landed on an island, seemingly no different from any other, but it was who was on the island that made it special. Goldie Roger had landed there at the same time. Throughout Whitebeard's adventures, this one man had crossed his path more than any other, as the only pirate who could match him. They were rivals, unlike the world had ever seen before, 2 pirates at the top, but ones with completely different goals, and like dozens of times before, they clashed. But their rivalry was more so a friendly one. They fought more so for the challenge and to sharpen their own skills than to actually harm each other, and the same went for their crews. After a hard-fought battle lasting 3 days and nights, the crews came together like nothing happened to share drinks and exchange gifts. Whitebeard, Roger, and Odin got to talking, and Roger discovered that Odin had the ability to read poneglyphs, and he needed someone with that ability on his crew, in order to achieve his goal of finding the final island on the Grand Line that no one had reached in 800 years. Roger begged Whitebeard to just let him take Odin for 1 year, but this enraged him. Roger wanted to take his little brother, not to mention his wife and kids, on a voyage through uncharted ocean that could have been host to the most dangerous creatures and natural calamities in the entire world, all for his selfish dreams. But the thing was, Odin wanted to go as well. With this, he was more annoyed and worried than angry, but he yielded. Roger gave him supplies and food as thanks, but Whitebeard refused to let Odin's family go hungry, so gave it all back. And so, his little brother went off on his grand adventure, and it was perhaps the grandest of them all. But that's a story for another day. Sometime after this, Whitebeard and Roger would meet for the last time. Roger was dying from an illness and only had a few months left. He offered to tell Whitebeard where the final island was so he could become the next king of the pirates, but Whitebeard said he wasn't interested in that, but he was curious about something. Throughout his travels, he encountered a few people with the initial D in their name, of course including Roger, but also his crewmate and son Marshall D. Teach. He wanted to know what that initial meant, and Roger told him. After this, Roger turned himself into the world government to be executed, rather than dying naturally from his illness, and in his final moments set off the greatest age of piracy the world had ever seen. But with his death, Whitebeard became the uncrowned king of the sea, a title he wasn't in the least interested in, but one that came with some huge benefits. His infamy and reputation as the only man who could match the now legendary pirate king was immense. With Roger's death, he was now called the strongest man in the world. His name alone struck fear into his enemies, and he used this to protect his family. No one would dare touch a member of the Whitebeard pirates now, and he also used his reputation to protect others, with the new age of piracy causing countless young, violent pirates to pour into the new world. world, Fishman Island was heavily targeted, being an island necessary to pass through to enter the New World. It fell into chaos as pirates pillaged it with no consequence, since Fishman Island wasn't protected by the world government, much like Whitebeard's home island of Sphinx. Seeing this, he planted his flag down on Fishman Island, naming it his territory, and with the claim of the strongest pirate alive, no one would dare touch Fishman Island as long as he lived. And speaking of his home island, Whitebeard hadn't forgotten about it. All this time, he was sending every last piece of treasure back to the island to build it up, making it flourish and thrive more than ever before, alongside claiming it as his territory so no one would touch it. He never forgot about his roots and the people he left behind to find a better life. He was always thinking of them. He'd become the strongest man in the world, with more power and influence than anyone else, but all that was a means to an end to accomplish his real goals, to keep his new family safe and help anyone else who was in need as much as he could. He built up his crew from 5 to 16 divisions, as well as having over 40 other crews in his fleet. He was in name and in reality the definition of an emperor, having countless islands under his protection alongside an enormous fleet at his command, and he thought of them all as his family, and they felt the same way. But unfortunately, with family comes tragedy. His brother Odin was killed by his former crewmate Kaido. The kid he'd brought into the Rock's crew, giving him his start as a pirate, was the one to kill his little brother. Since Wano was a closed country and information coming in and out was sparse, Whitebeard didn't find out until years later. He was of course devastated and considered going to war with Kaido, but it was too late. His brother was already dead, and if he tried to liberate his country of Wano, it would cause an untold number of casualties, not only from his crew and Kaido's, but the innocent people of Wano as well, so he could do nothing. Years passed, with Whitebeard ruling over his part of the New World, recruiting new members as he went, until one day he heard about a very interesting young pirate, Portgas D. Ace. In record time, he'd exploded onto the scene as the biggest young prospect, even being offered a position as a warlord after just a few months out on the sea. As young pirates do, Ace wanted to challenge Whitebeard to a duel to see where all the hype about him being the strongest came from. But first, he had to get through Jinbei, a warlord of the sea who was also fiercely loyal to Whitebeard for what he did for Fishman Island. Jinbei and Ace fought for 5 entire days, but in the end it was a draw, with both of them being utterly exhausted. But that was when Whitebeard arrived. Ace mustered up all of his strength for a last-ditch effort against Whitebeard, but he got shut down effortlessly. But Whitebeard didn't plan to kill him. Ace was a perfect example of the type of people Whitebeard took in, those with no direction and nowhere else to go, that needed a purpose, and Whitebeard wanted to give him that. Ace was violent at first, still trying to kill Whitebeard at every turn, but never even got close. Along the way, he formed friendships with the crew on board, including the 4th Division Commander Thatch and the 1st Division Commander Marco. Eventually, he asked Marco why they called Whitebeard their father, and he told him it was just because he called them his sons. All their lives, the world shunned them for who they were, so it made them happy to have someone care about them unconditionally, and have a home where they could belong. And this finally convinced Ace to join. He became fiercely loyal to Whitebeard, getting his symbol tattooed on his back and proudly fighting for him, and Whitebeard soon named him the 2nd Division Commander, Odin's old position that hadn't been filled since he left. And through all this, Ace found his home. Eventually, he felt guilty keeping a secret from Whitebeard all this time, so he told him the truth, that he was his old rival Roger's son. Whitebeard laughed, saying he was surprised. Ace wasn't much like him in personality. Ace was expecting him to kick him out, but Whitebeard didn't care about who someone's parents were. To him, they were all children of the sea. The sins or good deeds of the father didn't matter, and Whitebeard wouldn't see him any differently. But soon after this, a sin would be committed on that very ship. As per the rules of the crew, if someone found a devil fruit, they'd have the right to keep it. And Thatch, Ace's dear friend and Whitebeard's beloved son, had unfortunately found the fruit that the most ruthless man right under their noses wanted. Teach committed the ultimate crime on Whitebeard's ship, killing a fellow crewmate, and then he vanished. This was everything Whitebeard hated. For decades he tried to avoid this, going back to the ways of rocks, where crewmates would fight and kill each other on a whim. But his worst nightmare came true. One of his sons killed another and had now become a threat to the rest of his children as well. He had a horrible feeling about this. He knew that Teach was incredibly intelligent and obviously patient. He wouldn't do this on a whim. This was all part of a huge scheme, and going after him would be incredibly dangerous. Whitebeard knew the meaning of the Will of D that Roger told him, and though we don't know what it is, it no doubt played a factor into his decision. He told the crew to let this slide just this once. It was too dangerous to pursue Teach, now calling himself Blackbeard. But Ace didn't listen. He was overcome with rage over the death of his first friend he made on the crew, his brother, so he disregarded Whitebeard's order and the crew's pleas and went after Blackbeard himself. Whitebeard carried on, leading and being strong for his family, but he was incredibly worried about Ace. All while this was happening, he was suffering from a terminal illness. It was weakening him severely, and soon he had to be permanently hooked up to machines and be cared for 24/7 in order to live. During this time, the newest member of red-haired Shanks' crew, Rockstar, delivered a letter from Shanks. Whitebeard tore it up though, saying that Shanks would have to come see him himself if he wanted to tell him something. And so, Shanks came. Whitebeard hadn't seen Shanks since he was just a boy on Roger's ship, but now he was a fellow emperor. As he stepped onto his ship, his Conqueror's hockey flared and he knocked out the weaker members of Whitebeard's crew. He'd come to give Whitebeard a warning about Blackbeard. Being the man that gave Shanks his signature scar and waiting in the shadows for decades for his chance to strike, Shanks knew the danger he'd pose, so he told Whitebeard to call Ace back. Despite being completely against Ace chasing Blackbeard, Whitebeard took responsibility for his son's actions and presented them as his own, saying he couldn't let Blackbeard get away with breaking the most sacred rule on his ship. So Shanks drew his sword and Whitebeard responded, and they split open the heavens, as Whitebeard had done with Roger many times before. Things cooled off and they went their separate ways, but as Shanks feared and as Whitebeard secretly did too, things between Ace and Blackbeard would end in disaster. Blackbeard defeated him and turned him into the Marines, taking a spot on the Warlords as his reward for this. For decades, no one dared to touch a member of Whitebeard's crew. But now, for the first time, the Marines were forcing his hand. How would the King of the Sea respond to one of his beloved sons being up for execution? Well, he would show them. Yet again, he took responsibility for Ace's actions, saying that he gave the order for Ace to go after Blackbeard, and his crew all backed him up. They didn't blame Ace for the situation they were in, they just wanted to save him and bring him back home at any cost. It was a full-scale war, 100,000 Marines, the Admirals, and the Warlords against Whitebeard's fleet. He was proving that his reputation wasn't for show. Even in his old age, suffering from a terminal illness on death's door, he was fighting the entire world, battling thousands and thousands of Marines, throwing giants around like it was nothing, even going toe-to-toe with admirals. But through this, his family was fighting as well, and he had to stand by watching hundreds of his own children die. People think this means he valued Ace over the rest of his family, but this isn't true. He would have went to Marineford all by himself if he had to, but his crew would have refused to stay behind. They were willing to die for Ace because they saw him as a brother, as much as Whitebeard saw all of them as his children. But unfortunately, especially in wartime, things aren't always that simple. Whitebeard's own son was tricked into thinking this, that he loved Ace more than the rest of them, and had betrayed the rest of them to save Ace. So thinking that the man who he believed was his father betrayed him, Squard lashed out in emotion and rage. Whitebeard was so weakened by his condition, he couldn't see the attack coming. He was angered by Squard's stupidity, but he understood him and didn't blame him for getting tricked. He was still his son and he still loved him. He said that Ace wasn't special, they were all his family and they should be good to each other. He then proved without a shadow of a doubt that what the Marines said was a lie by giving his whole crew a chance to escape. He said that they should choose who to believe themselves, but if they chose to stay and fight for him, they should be prepared to give their lives. And they all gladly accepted, fully believing in their father as well as the cause they were fighting for. Even if he was the strongest, the most legendary pirate alive, he was still just one man with one heart like everyone else. He couldn't be the strongest forever, so if he could allow his family to live into the future, that would be enough for him. He turned his attention to his enemies and leaped into the front lines himself to lead by example, and his entire family followed him. But it wasn't enough. They were against the entire world, and one by one their enemies were getting the better of them. Whitebeard's body was giving up on him, giving Admiral Akainu the chance to strike. Thousands of Marines rushed him when it seemed like he was about to fall, but they all forgot who he was, so he reminded them. And eventually, after everything that had happened, his son was finally set free. He was satisfied, and so gave his final order. He told his family to escape and go back to the New World. Without him, he would stay behind to hold off the entire world to let them escape. They all pleaded for him to change his mind, but this was the only way. He was more than happy to give his life for his family, and they reluctantly listened, except for Ace. He had to stand by and watch his entire family fight and even die, all for him, and having to leave his father behind as well was too much. He ran to him, and Whitebeard just asked one question, not just to him, but to all of his children. And the answer was obvious. And after this, Ace reluctantly went to escape, but Ikainu would have one last trick to play. He started insulting Whitebeard, and though everyone told Ace not to listen, he just couldn't ignore it. Whitebeard saved his life and gave him a home, and he couldn't stand by and let someone insult the greatest man he'd ever known. But Ace played right into his hand, and he paid the ultimate price. Seeing this broke Whitebeard. Countless of his sons had already died fighting, but they'd done it to save Ace. But now, that was all for nothing, and he was dead too. Whitebeard's devastation quickly turned to rage, and he took it all out on the man who'd killed his son. He used the last of his monster strength, showing glimpses of the unstoppable force he was in his prime. But it wasn't that time anymore. As he said, it was a new era, and he wasn't the king anymore, but he was gonna go out with a bang. With his family escaping, he had nothing else to lose, and unleashed the full brunt of his power onto Navy HQ, completely demolishing it. But just when he thought his job was done, another one of his responsibilities reared its head. His former son Teach had come to take his place at the top of this new era, but Whitebeard wouldn't let that happen without a fight. Even with too many critical injuries to count, he fought his heart out, getting the better of Teach, but his body wouldn't allow him to finish the job. Teach took the coward's way out, having his entire crew attack Whitebeard instead of finishing the man himself. As his mind was fading, he recalled his last meeting with Roger, and what he told him about the truth of this world.
One Piece wa jitsuzai suru!
He reignited the age of piracy, and as Ace said, if this era was given a name, it would be called Whitebeard. His final thoughts were of his family. As much as he had given them, everything he had was from them as well. He was never interested in treasure or glory or power. All he ever wanted was a family, and he'd gotten his wish, and he could die happily, sending all of them off into the new era. When does a man die? It's when he's forgotten. After his death, Whitebeard's legacy lived on with all of his children, and everyone who ever knew him personally. To the world, he was known as a force of nature, the king of the sea for over 2 decades. For those in his territories, he was a savior and protector. And to those outside of them, a terrifying force that threatened the entire world with his immense power. He said that people would carry on Ace's will and Roger's, but there are also those who are carrying on his will. His son Marco, who'd been on the crew the longest, now protects the island dearest to Whitebeard's heart. And that's just one of the stories you could tell about the incredible impact he's made on this world. A child born with no family gave a home to thousands of children like him. He had a bigger heart than anyone else, but also an ego greater than everyone else. He gave everything for his family, while still retaining his indomitable pride, and even when he died, he refused to let himself fall in front of them.